As an adult, don't we all miss spring break? Nothing like taking a week off from all your responsibilities. Well, here's the next best thing for adults, a spring break from house payments. SaveWithConrad.com can help you get rid of all your credit card debt, just like that. We're routinely helping our listeners save $5, $6, $7, even $800 a month. And you don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket to do this, but check this out, no house payments for 2 months at SaveWithConrad.com. NMLS number 2129, equal housing lender. SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm freezing my freshly manscaped balls off. That's what I'm doing. It was like 19 degrees below zero. That's not that wind chill. None of that feels like sissy bullshit. This is like straight up, just according to the mercury on the thermometer, 19 degrees below zero. Now, that was yesterday. It's warmed up a little bit today, but yeah, it's a little chilly. I'm paying the price. It's now officially winter in Wyoming.
Yeah, man, it's winter everywhere. I don't know if you saw, but it's snowing in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, the Gulf of America today.
Gulf of America, yeah. How about that?
Yeah, I can't believe it, but there's snow forecasted for Pensacola today, multiple inches, which is just crazy for me to think about. I don't think it's ever happened like that there. So when we first jumped on and I saw you bundled up, I was like, oh, it's that time of year.
Yeah, I look, like a week ago, I was hiking with my dog in nothing but a sweatshirt. It was like late summer almost. And boy, like I said, we're making up for it now. It's going to be a cool stretch. The good news is I'm taking off this week. As this airs, I'm in Tampa, Florida, and going to be there for a few days. And I'm heading up to Huntsville to hang out with y'all, and then back to Tampa for a few more days. So I'm going to be able to dodge the bullet for a while.
Well, I'm glad you're getting to warmer weather, and I'm glad we're finally getting to the rise of Goldberg. That's our topic today. We've intended to do this on multiple occasions, but we're actually going to get started on this story today. And I, for one, am excited to talk about it because I do think there's lessons that we can learn when we take a look and examine, with the benefit of hindsight, the Goldberg story. I mean, well, before we talk about Goldberg all the way, I do want to mention some crazy stuff has happened since you and I first clicked record last week. Triple H actually quote tweeted TNA last weekend in advance of the Genesis pay-per-view. He quote tweeted the official TNA account and said, "Huge night ahead for our friends at This Is TNA. Excited to watch hashtag TNA Genesis tonight live on pay-per-view." I asked Jeff Jarrett, I'll ask you, when you were with TNA, could you have ever in a million years imagined something like that? Isn't that weird?
Oh, yeah, that I'm sorry, in my mind, I was jumping ahead to the point I wanted to make, but no, that would have, well, everything was so different then. It was a completely different universe we were all living in at that point in time. But no, that thought, even in the most optimistic and we'll call it creative frame of mind I could possibly put myself in, it would have never, my imagination wouldn't have picked up on that one.
It's interesting to see how quietly TNA has been growing too. I don't know if you saw, but they had just a monstrous crowd, a really hot crowd at Genesis. And it feels like, TNA's got a little momentum. Of course, this started more than a year ago with Scott D'Amore, but it feels like, ever since that name change back to TNA, which I know was a name that was criticized quite a bit once upon a time, it feels like they've got a little bit of momentum. And the new face of TNA is Joe Hendry. I mean, this guy has been over like Rover across the pond, as we like to say, since 2018. That was the first time I saw him. And man, the crowd was just connected to him. Well, he brought that act to national television here, and man, it blew up last year. My dude made the charts for a song. Like, yeah, the music charts. And now he's the TNA world champion. Joe Hendry is the man. He's the next big thing for TNA. And I just want to get your read on everything that's happening in TNA right now, Eric.
Yeah, I'm kind of keeping an eye on things there, based on things that I read and hear. I'm not going to make an appointment to watch the show necessarily, but I do check it out and clips of it. And, about 2 months ago on this show, we talked about a new executive position that had been recently announced in TNA by Anthem. And I made the comment based on the bits of the resume that came along with this individual. And I apologize for not remembering his name. My comment was, it looks like they're poised for growth. And what are we seeing? We're seeing growth. And it's been going on since before this individual joined the company. But this is what growing your audience actually looks like. And to your point, I think TNA has a unique challenge, in a sense, when you compare it to AEW, in that when AEW launched, it was a fresh new brand. It had zero baggage. It had a tremendous amount of supporting goodwill from an audience that was desperate for an alternative. Whereas TNA, even with the name change, which comes with some advantages because there is legacy there, there's a library there, there's value there, and I get that. But the TNA, first of all, the name TNA was a huge mistake from the get-go from a branding perspective. And there's a fair amount of baggage that comes with that brand. Some of it deserved, much of it not, but it doesn't matter. Baggage is baggage. And overcoming that challenge, overcoming the baggage that the narrative represents is far more difficult than starting with a clean slate with a lot of goodwill. So while we're seeing incremental growth, which is the best kind of growth, by the way, because it allows you to grow your infrastructure and your business along with it to support it, as opposed to building out too much infrastructure where people are stepping all over each other and nobody's really sure who's doing what because you haven't grown into your shoes, so to speak. What it looks like to me is this is calculated, designed, incremental growth. This is what it should look like. And I hope and pray, literally pray, that they continue to grow successfully and incrementally and be in a viable position in terms of a wrestling franchise.
I am pulling for TNA. I'm excited for their growth, excited for what's next, but they did have a little bit of a headline on another channel on the GCW Hammerstein show on the exact same night as the TNA pay-per-view. They had a free preview show over on YouTube, a countdown show, if you will. And PCO was there. He's fresh off of a 3-year run with TNA. And after the match, he had a live microphone and had someone bring him a chair and a sledgehammer and their digital media title. And he got after it. And listen, I think this is one of the fun things about wrestling, Eric, is, you know, if you really love the dirt of wrestling, the dirt, as Jim Ross might say, channeling his best Jim Barnett, this is the sort of thing that people look for, but it did feel like, boy, this is shades of Eric Bischoff here. Let's take another promotions title and do something with it. Did you see this? What did you think of this?
I didn't see it. I certainly heard about it. And look, if it's part of a story, then very cool, because it is the kind of thing that will get people talking. It'll create buzz. It'll create interest where there might not otherwise be because of the unique nature of the events that took place. But if it's just some guy trying to get himself over and not part of a story, it'll come, it'll go, and it will end up not meaning anything. So I hope it's part of a story.
Well, another story we want to keep an eye on is the former Baron Corbin showing up in GCW. I think this was his first ever event in professional wrestling outside of WWE. He was at that Game Changer show at Hammerstein. They took down all the ropes, and he battled Josh Barnett in a Bloodsport rules match. This is normally something that you see around WrestleMania. Josh Barnett puts on a series of these grappling expositions. It almost feels like, you know, a worked shoot, maybe like the UWFI or something like that from a different generation. What do you think of, first of all, Baron Corbin doing something outside of WWE? That was cool. What do you think about the Bloodsport concept, Eric?
I mean, it's interesting, I guess. It's different. So, it'll catch your eye and capture your imagination for a brief period of time. Look, this kind of thing has been tried and failed in Japan. There are people that I've talked to who have worked in Japan for many years who kind of feel like when Inoki made that shift, when MMA was starting to get really popular, and Inoki wanted to blur the lines between New Japan Pro Wrestling and MMA, that was the beginning of the end of New Japan. Now, that from executives who worked there during the time, who were in some cases still friends of mine. So these are people who have firsthand experience there. So it's kind of cool, but it doesn't represent the kind of visual dynamics that people normally associate with professional wrestling. I kind of like it personally because I've always been a fan of amateur wrestling and MMA, but it's not sustainable in terms of, consistently presenting it. But as a one-off, I think it's a great idea. And by the way, Baron Corbin, I'm a big fan of Baron's. Know him a little bit, got to work with him, talk to him a little bit while I was in WWE for a minute. An incredibly athletic guy. I mean, people don't realize what a great athlete he is and his background. So I'm happy to see him still active. He's a cool guy, and he loves to cook on his Big Green Egg. By the way, he's actually pretty good. I don't know that I'd challenge him. I would take a challenge because I'll always do that, but I wouldn't be optimistic about it. Let's put it that way.
I am looking forward to seeing what's next for the former Baron Corbin. Follow him on Twitter if you haven't already. I'm probably butchering his last name, but Tom Pistock is his name, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next. I think he's a good dude, and I think he's probably been given not the most fair shake by the internet wrestling community. When you actually get to see the guy show his real personality and not Baron Corbin, the character, which maybe some of you didn't like. I think it's going to be fun. Something else that I know everybody's waiting on us to comment on this past Monday on Netflix on Raw. We saw a great skit of CM Punk where we caught him walking through the mezzanine level amongst all the fans. And he walked out and cut a promo in the crowd, which I thought, man, what a cool idea that is. It looks great. And then he started talking about the Royal Rumble by saying something like, you put Hulk Hogan in the Royal Rumble, I'll throw his dusty ass over the top and I'll kill Hulkamania once and for all. I know that you've had issue with CM Punk seemingly taking shots at Hulk Hogan before, but given what just happened a few weeks ago, if listen to me, if Punk is trying to make himself this super over baby face, he's just playing off what happened a couple of weeks ago. I didn't think this was that big a deal, but the internet wants you to chime in, Eric. So the floor is yours.
Well, completely different situations. Number one, they both work for the same company. That kind of matters. And number two, this was, first of all, let me just say, I kind of liked it. I thought it was fun.
Yes.
So there's that. But let's keep the context clear. What I got upset about, upset isn't the right word, but what I made a point of when Punk first came to AEW was a comment that Punk made about him coming to AEW along with whoever else he was including in that mix was a more significant acquisition for AEW than Hogan, Hall, and Nash were for WCW. And that was just a stupid thing to say. And when you're saying something like that to try to get yourself over about a guy who doesn't even work in your company, it's I don't know. It doesn't resonate for me. I'm sure the Dirt Sheet Marks or Dave Meltzer guys are all over it because that's kind of the limit of their intellectual curiosity, I guess, maybe. And I just thought it was stupid. I thought it was a poor reflection on Punk, in my opinion, as a professional. If that's all you've got to try to get yourself over when you first show up, is to say something stupid about a guy that doesn't work in your company that you've never met, it's kind of showing your ass. That was my comment then. This, on the other hand, is a different situation. I will argue that if Punk thinks he's going to get himself over as a baby face by taking shots at Hulk, creatively speaking, in this scenario, because that's what we're talking about here, he might find himself surprised. That's happened before. Ask Rock. Situation is different here, obviously, but I think people are still reading way too much into one appearance and one reaction, when I personally see other appearances and other reactions, they're the exact opposite. So we'll see. I could be wrong. You know, I'm biased. I'm not going to lie. I don't hide it like some people do. Yeah, Hulk's one of my best friends, and I want to see him happy, and I want to see him successful. And I think people need to be aware that there's still a pretty big fan base for Hulk Hogan. Maybe not in LA, but in a lot of other places.
You know, we've never talked about this, and we're not going to make it a point to start talking about politics on wrestling on the show now. So if you're wondering, based on the question I'm about to ask, no, this is not going to become a political talk show. We're not going to talk politics. But I do want to know, in your experience, Eric, do you think that wrestling fans, I'm not saying the people inside the business, I'm saying wrestling fans, do you think that the vocal majority are left-leaning?
I don't know. I've never really thought about it. I don't know. I don't think you can make that. I don't know anybody that can make that statement that hasn't done a fair amount of significant, legitimate research into the question. Otherwise, you're just going on gut feeling. And let's be honest, when people see, I'll be honest, I'll speak for myself. When I see things in the news, and I think most people fall into this category, the things that you attach yourself to, the things that capture your interest, are things that represent ways you already feel. It's just human nature. Very few people are attracted to things they don't like, right? So you don't spend much time reading things or trying to understand things that go against your perception of a person, place, or thing. So, yeah, when you're in, that's why I say when you're in a market like LA and you've got, and I know so many people, made but Undertaker, look, Undertaker didn't come out on the campaign trail and literally campaign for Trump in character. Yes, he did a podcast with him. Yes, he's a supporter of Trump, I guess. I haven't followed Undertaker and what he said or done. I've been led to believe that he's been open about his political affiliations, but that's not quite the same as going out there in character and literally promoting the guy. Last night he was at the inauguration. I talked to Hulk a couple of days ago, and he was getting ready to get on a plane, and he's a part of that world right now. Undertaker did a podcast. Big difference. And yes, there's going to be some different type of reaction to Hulk Hogan in LA than you might get other places. But underestimating it right now, I think, is generally a mistake. But as far as the general wrestling audience, are they liberal? Are they conservative? I think it's so hard to say right now. I mean, as a country, we're kind of like 51-49 or 53, whatever, 47, depending on whose polls you want to believe. So, it's fair to say we're a divided country. And I think things that occur in real time have a dramatic influence over that. So I would say, yeah, in some markets, you're going to get people, some conservative markets, you're going to get an entirely different reaction than you will in probably the bluest of blue and the most passionate of liberal voters, which are concentrated in Los Angeles. And if you haven't spent a lot of time there, what I'm saying won't really stick with you. But if you haven't spent a lot of time there, you can trust me on this one.
Well, we're looking forward to getting together and talking a little WWE this Saturday. I can't believe it, but Saturday night's main event is back from San Antonio, and we're going to be live immediately following the event at 83weeks.com. Of course, it's going to be on NBC. It's going to be on Peacock. And Eric and I are going to be right here with you immediately following the program. Jump on with us. It's totally free. 83weeks.com. The lineup so far is Jey Uso versus Gunther for the World Heavyweight title, Rhea Ripley and Nia Jax for the Women's World title, Sheamus versus Braun Breaker for the Intercontinental title, Braun Strowman versus Jacob Fatu. What? And Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens are going to sign their contract for their match at the Royal Rumble, and Shawn Michaels is going to be there. You know, listen, the first time we saw Saturday night's main event, you and I thought afterwards, okay, they're introducing the brand and where the company is today to a new audience. That's what it felt like. This feels like, with it being sort of the go-home show just a week away from the Royal Rumble, it feels like we're going to get more storyline in this Saturday night's main event. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I'm sure we will. I absolutely will. Why would anybody not expect that WWE is going to take every advantage to advance stories, heighten anticipation, and create awareness for the money matches, which are coming up at Royal Rumble. So absolutely.
Well, of course, Royal Rumble is the following weekend, and you and I are going to be together for ad-free shows, Top Guy Rumble, and man, we've got a really fun idea. ATM Eric is officially open for business again for one night only. Ad-free shows, Top Guy Rumble event here in Huntsville. Who knows Eric Bischoff better than Eric Bischoff? We're about to find out as top guys test their knowledge and compete against you, Eric, for a chance to win some of your cold, hard cash.
Hey, is there any chance I could get my wife in that contest? Because, you know, that way I'm giving up the money, but I'll probably get the money back.
Our buddy Efren does a phenomenal job with these games. If you've never participated in the game event, you're missing out. I can't wait to see what he's got in store for ATM Eric. Win Bischoff's money at Top Guy Rumble. It really is a wrestling weekend like no other. We're going to have games, panels, meet and greets, a pro wrestling fantasy camp, and then our own private wrestling show that we get to help book and be a part of. It's all happening Royal Rumble weekend at the Von Braun Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And you can still be a part of Top Guy Rumble by becoming an annual Top Guy member now at adfreeshows.com. That's where you'll find more than 100,000 hours of bonus content, including series you can't catch anywhere else with Lex Luger, Godfather, David Crockett, Mike Chioda, Nick Patrick, Tully Blanchard, Sam Adonis, and Downtown Bruno. Check it out. You'll be glad you did. It's adfreeshows.com.
You know, Efren is such a cool cat.
Yes.
Different, and he's extremely talented and funny. He should have a show. I don't know what a show would be. I'm going to think about that. But this guy should be hosting a show. He should be on television. He's that talented.
He's got the costuming ready for it. You know, in his real life, I don't know that I should say talk about his real life, but let's just say that his employers call on him to make these big presentations and giveaways and promotions, and he doesn't miss. I mean, he's got the outfits, he's got every detail, he's got the earpieces, he's got the mic flags.
I have an idea.
He's even got a belt.
We're going to create a wrestling cooking show called Food Fight, and he's going to be the referee and host. There we go.
Okay.
I'm pitching it as soon as the show is over. You think I'm kidding? You actually think I'm kidding, and I'm laughing. Okay. But I'll copy you on the email so you can see it.
Well, he's an LA boy. He's only an hour from LA. He's ready.
Oh, even better. No trans. He's not a good. He's not geographically undesirable either.
No, not at all.
I like it. This is falling together. Yes. Sometimes you put stuff out in the universe and the pieces just fall from the sky. Had a lot of that. I love
when a plan comes together. Let's talk about the Goldberg plan. You know, we've talked about the myth of ATM Eric a few episodes ago. But Bill Goldberg, he's somebody I want to ask you about, because when he comes in as a trainee, I think through research, we've seen that he was making around $100,000 a year to go to the power plant. Now, I know some people are going to throw the flag on that, but as a reminder, this is sort of, you know, NIL before NIL was a thing, based on the way WWE has been recruiting big time athletes to come train at the Performance Center. Well, Goldberg was a guy who played college ball and then played in the NFL. It's not uncommon for a guy like Baron Corbin or Bill Goldberg, when they've played in the NFL, they're not going to come in and make indie guy pay right away. And I know that upsets people, but that's just not how you recruit athletes like that, right, Eric?
It upsets inexperienced people. It upsets the lower intellectual level of the wrestling audience. You got to pay his dues. Meanwhile, they've never paid a due. They've got miserable lives and they're kind of angry or jealous or envious in an unhealthy way to people who have, in this case, Bill Goldberg, who probably played football from the time he was 6, made it to the NFL, which if you look at the odds of a high school football player making it to the NFL, like day one, forget about a career, day one, the odds are so ridiculously low. And then to be able to have a multi-year career, maybe you're not a big star, maybe you're a backup for a year or 2 or 3. It doesn't matter. If you have developed your game, your athletic ability, what it takes in your head to get to that, the discipline and the commitment and all those things that you've been developing since you were probably 6 years old. If there are wrestling fans out there that don't think that someone who has achieved that level of success and demonstrated that much athletic ability and potential doesn't deserve more consideration than the guy from Jiffy Lube that dreams about being a professional wrestler, there's nothing I can say to help them. They are who they are. They think the way they think. But I think, in my opinion, the opportunity to get Bill Goldberg at $100 grand, even in 1997 money, was a hell of an opportunity.
Let's just take.
Bill didn't think so, by the way. Bill had other opinions about that, but I wasn't as sold on Bill Goldberg when he first came in as I should have been.
We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Goldberg because I do think there's lessons in just the way he was presented and booked. We'll talk about all that, but I do want to spend just a minute and talk about the power plant because, the PC, as we call it in the internet wrestling community, the WWE's Performance Center down in Orlando, man, it's spoken about like it was this great innovation when they first debuted it, like, I don't know, 11 or 12 years ago. And to this day, people still hold it with great reverence. And I get it, man. They've cranked out it's become a hub for a lot of wrestling talent. Allegedly, there's people we just saw in the TNA pay-per-view this past Sunday who were there getting ready to appear on WWE programming. The difference in rings and the scale and the ropes and just working with some of their coaching. That's like a finishing school at times, but it's also a place where beginners can come. And when I think about that, I think, oh, that's the power plant. And I wanted to know, how does the power plant become a thing? How does it evolve through the years? Was there like an official pipeline to get big time athletes through the door? Like we know that, Jim Ross was a big believer in amateur athletics, and Jerry Briscoe was obviously monitoring what's happening in the amateur wrestling world.
And recruiting. He was not only monitoring, he was actively recruiting.
Was there some sort of an initiative within WCW to go for those type of athletes? And how does the power plant evolve with time?
I think the power plant started before my time in management, so I can't speak to the genesis of it. But once I kind of got involved in management and aware of the power plant, my perception, it may not be true, but my perception was that it really came together because Jody Hamilton had a ring and some equipment, and everybody recognized that we needed to have a place where talent could work out. Even before there was any real initiative to recruit or develop talent there, it was really for existing current talent to have a place, if they lived in Atlanta, to come and work out a match or get in a workout or whatever. That was my impression. I could be wrong about that. Patrick would be able to speak in much greater detail than I can on that particular issue in terms of the genesis. But even almost immediately, once I got into management, I'm talking about 1993 in particular, I wasn't involved in wrestling operations. I know I've made that clear, but people have a tendency to forget, ignore, or not pay attention. So I repeat, I wasn't involved in wrestling operations, meaning I didn't get to make any choices or decisions or have any input as to how things were run. But as a part of the team, I became more and more aware of people's thought. People like Jody Hamilton, for one. Terry Taylor was very outspoken about it. Ole Anderson was punch holes in walls. He gets so animated talking about it. Dusty Rhodes, I spent a lot of time with Dusty, more time with Dusty than anybody else. Dusty talked about the need to develop talent because in 93, 92, 93, when I first touched the power plant or became exposed to it, there really wasn't the independent wrestling scene that we have today. And guys like Ole and Dusty and others who had been around for a while would lament the fact that, hey, where are we going to get talent? If we don't develop our own, we're going to run out because nobody else is developing because the territories are gone. That was the thinking. So the power plant went from having a facility that existing talent could use to a loosely defined strategy to recruit new talent, people that wanted to become wrestlers. Now, again, that occurred at a time when WCW was hemorrhaging cash. And my job, by 1994 at least, was to make everything accountable. And if things weren't making money, slow it down or shut it down. If things were making money, try to grow it. The power plant was kind of stuck in the middle, right? We knew we needed talent, but it wasn't really making any money. So the people that were operating it, and I'm going to say Bob Dew, initially Ole Anderson, Jody Hamilton for sure, were the principals involved. They tried to figure out a way to turn it into a self-sustaining operation, which is when I think why they started charging people to offset the cost of operating it. But it was, when I say loosely defined strategy, hey, I know a guy that knows a guy that wants to become a wrestler, set him on down, let's take their money. I'm not proud of it necessarily, but that's essentially what it was. It was a commercial opportunity, much like wrestling schools are today, only it had the aura, I guess, if it was the right word at the time, of being, associated with WCW and Turner Broadcasting. And then over time, as we started to grow, it became a more important part of the overall operation. And we started really developing talent. And guys like Diamond Dallas Page, for example, who wasn't like a guy off the street. He was already part of the company. He was there when I got there, for crying out loud. But he wanted to make the transition into wrestling. So now there's more people there. There's more talent there. There are some people coming in off the street who are paying money to train there, right? But we're also starting to recognize it as, hey, this really is a viable way to at least get talent ready for dark matches, which is where Bill Goldberg comes in.
Well, it does feel like the switch from traditional wrestling school where it's sort of private and we're just making tuition. That all changes in 95 because it starts to get a big, heavy push on TV. You mentioned Jody Hamilton, another guy who's a big part of all that. Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker was his character. We saw him on TV, but
there's Pistol Pez Watley.
The man, if you've never seen any Pistol Pez Watley, go watch some of his promos from Jim Crockett Promotions. Eric, have you ever seen some of those?
No.
Dude, I got to send you some links. Tony Schiavone and I watched episodically every week of TV for JCP years ago. He was in the middle of a feud with the Boogie Woogie Man. Man, he was out there calling Jimmy Valiant an undercover hillbilly and so many. God, it was so good. So good. Let's talk about Goldberg. The first time we see him as a quote unquote smart mark in the newsletters was the summer of 97. He's going to be working dark matches before the television cameras are on. And we hear about some of those results, like the Observer here in July of 1997. So this would have been just a few months before his television debut. At Nitro in Orlando, Joe Gomez, shout out to the mayor, beat Jeff Bradley, who worked for a cup of coffee for ECW as Dudley Dudley. And Bill Gold, whose real name is Bill Goldberg, beat Hector Guerrero in dark matches. Gold is really green, but has good size, and people think he's got potential. Listen, Hector Guerrero, man, what a legend, what experience, what a veteran. It makes total sense that you would put a new guy from the power plant in there with an old vet like Hector Guerrero, who's, man, you could probably throw any sort of situation at him and he knows how to handle it. But what jumps off the page is that we're calling him Bill Gold. Now, one of two things could be true. It could be that he was actually introduced as Bill Gold. I'm going to assume it's that. The other is there's a chance that whoever was there and gave this report to Dave Meltzer just didn't hear it correctly. Do you remember there ever being discussion of, hey, what if we called him Bill Gold? Or were you not even involved at that point?
I was not even involved at that point. I feel pretty safe taking a just wild ass guess that your latter explanation is probably the accurate one. But I don't know for sure. There's no way you could say definitely, but in all likelihood, because Dave doesn't report on things that he's seen necessarily, he relies, especially when it comes to live events, he relies solely on input from his audience. So it could have just been that the person reporting it heard it wrong, or Dave read it wrong or heard it wrong and used Bill Gold, or it could have been, hey, we're not sure what we want to call him yet. We don't want to use his real name quite yet, so let's just call him Bill Gold. It's a dark match. Nothing matters other than getting a look at the talent under pressure, a little bit of pressure. So anything could have happened. I don't know.
I'm asking that because Tony Schiavone has told us a big story about the actual television debut. Let's talk about that. Nitro, September 22nd, 1997. We're in West Valley City, Utah. There's a sellout there, 7,923 fans. 5,900 of those were paying fans. The gate was around 142 grand. And it's written here in the Observer, rookie Bill Goldberg pinned Hugh Morris in 2 minutes and 24 seconds after a suplex, after kicking out of the moonsault. Goldberg, who looked very much like Warlord, slightly gassed down, was a football player in the Falcons camp a few years back, who they've been high on for a few months. And he's done some worldwide and some dark match tryouts. Goldberg wound up with a black eye out of the match. He definitely has potential because he was pretty mobile for a big guy who obviously was green. Gene Okerlund tried to interview Goldberg, who walked off. And the gimmick they're trying to do with him is he's a mystery guy and nobody knows anything about him. Well, I don't know that that was a total gimmick because Tony Schiavone told us he recalls on Goldberg's debut, as Goldberg is walking to the ring, he had no idea what we were going to call Bill Goldberg. He told me on our podcast that he hit a button on his desk, so I guess it's a talkback button. He could talk to the truck or someone like that, and it wouldn't go out over the broadcast. And he's asking, as Goldberg is walking to the ring, what are we calling him, guys? Is it Bill Goldberg? Is it just Goldberg? What are we going with? I guess there was some back and forth. He receives confirmation through the headset exactly how to refer to him. It's Bill Goldberg, and this is the debut. But Meltzer would say the gimmick they're trying to do with him is he's a mystery guy and nobody knows anything about him. Me understanding a little bit more about WCW at the time and just seeing how wrestling works today in a lot of places, is this a circumstance where you think perhaps we just didn't know yet? You know, listen, we're a few months away from the biggest show in history. We're the number one wrestling company in the world. This is a kind of a preliminary match, respectfully. Let's just go out there, let him show some of that intensity, and we'll figure it out later. I mean, did you have a real plan for Gold? Because the idea of the gimmick is nobody knows anything about him. Hell, the announcer didn't know his name.
It wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't a plan. You know, again, Dave Meltzer pretending like he knows something, suggesting that the plan for now is, again, it's Dave. He's an idiot. We didn't have a plan, and it wasn't that important that we did. Yeah, I mean, when I say to you, I wasn't as sold on Bill Goldberg, clearly overly impressed with the look. I mean, he looked like right out of Central Casting, right? But in my limited experience at that time, and I probably would have the same feeling today, actually, the odds of someone making it from the NFL, making that, not that they're not capable of learning it, certainly They're athletes. It's not a question about that. Just mentally, that's a big transition. You got to really, really want that because you're going from the NFL, which is, platinum status, to an opening match or a dark match. That's a big mental and emotional transition for people that don't really need it. Bill didn't need the money when he came in. So for that reason, I was like, okay, let's give this a shot. I was hopeful, but I wasn't like, all right, we need to sit. I want a 6-month plan for this guy. It wasn't that. It was, okay, this guy's got an incredible look. He's got some potential. He's got that NFL tag on him. We can maybe do something with. He's got a great look. Let's see how he holds up. Let's get him out there in front of people. Let's see if he likes it enough to continue with it before we invest a ton of money or time into developing this character. That's the honest truth.
It's interesting to take a look back at this because, when we talked to Kevin Sullivan a couple of years ago here in Huntsville, he made the comparison because the natural inclination, let's remember the timeline here, September of 1997. That's the same month we're on the other channel. Stone Cold Steve Austin is giving a stunner to Vince McMahon and getting arrested in Madison Square Garden. Very quickly, Stone Cold is becoming the top star in the WWF. And now on this same channel, we see, well, he's a bald guy with a goatee and black trunks and black boots. A lot of internet wrestling fans just jumped in and said, oh, he's a Steve Austin ripoff. But if you talk to Kevin Sullivan said that wasn't the idea. He was going to be WCW's Mike Tyson. We wanted a guy in the short black boots, just like Mike Tyson did. We had the entrance in the backstage area to the ring once he was a star, just like Mike Tyson did. He wore black and he even put him in gloves, MMA gloves. Wouldn't have made sense with wrestling gloves because Kevin Sullivan saw the box office appeal of Mike Tyson. Again, in 1997, Mike Tyson is the biggest star in sports. That's the year where he bit Evander Holyfield's ear. So if you've got all of this brand identity, these little details about a megastar like Mike Tyson, why not create it in WCW? And real sportsmen, real sports fans, real boxing enthusiasts back in the day, they would say things like, and I'm sure you heard this, Eric, oh, Mike Tyson is a paper champion. The promoters have just fed him a bunch of tomato cans and he's not really the best fighter. He couldn't hang with the greats like Muhammad Ali. They're just, and I'm not arguing any of that. I'm just saying the idea of we're going to have short matches. We're going to have a lot of power. We're going to have a lot of intensity, the short black boots, the gloves. That Mike Tyson thing from Kevin Sullivan was a real light bulb moment for me. Was that your intent? Did you see that? Do you remember Kevin bringing that up? Or now are we just learning, hey, man, old Mr. Sullivan knew a thing or two?
Bill Goldberg, everything about him that we saw on television, at least by this point, was Kevin Sullivan. I didn't have anything to do with that. I didn't have the creative foresight or vision, nor was it necessarily my job to try to build Bill Goldberg. That was decidedly Kevin Sullivan's job and why I paid him a lot of money. And he was good at it. So you would have to take Kevin's word for it since he's the guy that did it, not me. So I totally understand what we're hearing Kevin was thinking at that point in time. It's consistent with what I remember. And I'll add another layer to it. It was very comfortable for Bill. Now, one of the things I did know, having worked with a lot of talent that were inexperienced as a director and a producer, was that it was always better to keep a talent in a young talent, especially keep them in their comfort zone. Don't ask them to try to become a character that's the antithesis of who they really are. You can move them a little bit. You can turn up the dial a little bit here and there on their natural personalities, but you can't take a guy like Bill Goldberg and say, okay, I want you to be an effeminate piano player. Think Liberace. That ain't gonna work. And Bill was always very big into Muay Thai from the very first time I met Bill. He talked about his MMA training and Muay Thai, and I think he still trains in it. So between Kevin's vision for Bill and looking at Mike Tyson, I promise you nobody was looking at Steve Austin. It's a coincidence, but it wasn't an intention. The intention was, as you pointed out, per Kevin Sullivan, Mike Tyson, simple, quick matches, and that was out of necessity. That wasn't like a creative, architecture. That was like, okay, this guy knows 3 things really, really well, and that's it. So what are we going to do? We're going to let him go out and do those 3 things and get him over fast, because he couldn't go out and have a 20-minute match. So it was one of those, I think, a situation where everything kind of fell into place, driven by primarily Kevin's vision for Bill.
I can't wait for us to talk about the evolution of Goldberg, but the MMA gloves, I think, threw off a lot of people, Eric. I wanted to ask you about that, because Dave would even suggest that one of the original ideas was that Ming was going to face Goldberg at the World War III show because, well, we're trying to present Goldberg like a shoot fighter. And we would see occasionally, Goldberg break out like a knee lock or something like that. But I think people jumped to that because he had those gloves on, and there's been debate. Are they UFC style gloves, MMA gloves? Are they lineman's gloves like we've seen Vader wear before? And some people even said, hey, they're just trying to pattern Goldberg a little bit like Boss Rutan, which I thought was a stretch.
Yeah, I don't know that
Boss Rutan,
since there's about 4 people in the audience that would know who Boss Rutan was at the time.
That's right. Like, he's not like he's a household name. So why would that even make sense? So, do you remember, as far as the presentation goes in the beginning, was there any consideration that we might, because I know on commentary, we were hammering the fact that, he's a former Falcon. I don't remember the shoot fighting thing being a major priority, but maybe I'm misremembering. Do you remember that?
No, I don't think, no, I think you're right. It wasn't a point that we drove home. We weren't trying to present him as an MMA guy. I didn't want to do that. I've never been a fan, kind of like the comments about the shoot match we were talking about that took place at GCW. I like it every once in a while, but you can't sustain it. You can't build a character off of that. It's just not a dynamic enough presentation, number one. And number two, people were seeing a lot of great MMA and UFC. You've got people now who are, like the Gracies and all of the people that came after them who brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to MMA and gave it credibility. And we started seeing more and more and more of it. You don't want guys out there doing things that look like, and I see it all the freaking time today. I hate when I see it, when I see people trying to do what appears to be an MMA submission and it looks like dog shit. And it's so easy to pick it out because we've seen enough of it done well. We know what it's supposed to look like when it's real. And then you see a really fucked up wrestling version of it and it looks weak as snot. So I'm never a fan of trying to make a rush, even with Ernest Miller. Ernest Miller had a legitimate martial arts background. Yeah, he sprinkled a little bit of it in here and there, and it may be a part of his finishing move, but he really had to learn how to wrestle because that's 98% of the match. The rest of it is just fun to watch. So I think, again, Bill's whole personality and character, as it was defined on television, was more about what came naturally to Bill, what Kevin Sullivan saw for Bill, and he was a product of the circumstances, meaning he didn't have a lot of experience. As far as the type of gloves, I never asked him because it was never important to ask. It was never a topic of conversation in terms of day-to-day business. I just assumed, because I knew Bill worked out in MMA, in Muay Thai specifically, that's where they came from. But they could have been lineman's gloves. I'm just not sure because it never came up.
It's just interesting to think about, everybody wants to say, oh, he's just ripping this off. Oh, he's just copying that. And the Torch even wrote about this. Regarding Bill Goldberg's resemblance to Steve Austin, Bischoff said in a Prodigy chat, not at all. Bill Goldberg is much bigger and in much better shape and is a far better athlete than Steve Austin has ever been. Bill Goldberg is going
Did I really say that?
Yes, sir, you did.
Sorry, Steve. That was a long time ago, brother. I was working too. You know that, brother. You know, Steve. But it was true. Sorry again, Steve.
He won't be a character per se. He's a very intense, very gifted athlete. Steve Austin isn't the only performer who happens to shave his head. That's the only thing they have in common. And I got to say, I think you're on to something here. I don't know about the whole better athlete thing. They both played college football. Arguably, Goldberg had a better football career. I don't think that's arguable. He had a better football career. But I think we all know that Steve Austin had a better wrestling career. But I get why you're
there's that.
There is that. But if Goldberg has a big old head of hair, nobody makes the comparison to Steve Austin, do they?
No.
Why do you think that is, Eric? That, like, it annoys me a lot, and I get that I'm a fat white guy from Alabama saying this, but it annoys me whenever there's an African-American wrestler and then there's another African-American wrestler that joins the group or joins the promotion. They're like, oh, they should do a faction. It's like, why? Because the Nation of Domination was a group once. Like, what does that matter? How are we drawing that comparison? And this is sort of the same thing to me. Like, oh, he's just ripping off Steve Austin. It's like, with a different haircut, would we say that? And respectfully, it's not like everyone who shaves their head, it's their first choice. You know, I don't think Cassio Kid, when I met him, he had hair. I wouldn't say a head full of hair, but as the forehead became a 5 head, became a 6 head, he just made the good call to shave it off. Like, why is that? Oh, well, this must mean that didn't make any sense to me, Eric.
Well, you've got to understand, and this is one of the reasons I love messing with dipshits like Dave Meltzer to this day, is because he represents a segment of the wrestling audience, which is probably one of the loudest segments of the audience on the internet, right? There's that, you have 95% of the audience for professional wrestling on television. And then you have the 5% that are such obsessive compulsive fans that they dominate discourse in the internet wrestling community. And the one thing that they all have in common is an extremely low quotient when it comes to critical thinking. And they tend to, they have a herd mentality. It's like they find the smartest, dumbest one and repeat whatever that person said. And Dave Meltzer happens to be maybe one of the smartest, dumbest ones. So that's where it starts. And then it just kind of feeds itself and it grows a little bit. And they end up making the most noise. And you remember the comments and the Dave Meltzer quotes and all that kind of bullshit. But it really doesn't mean much. It's fun to mess with them, though. I do have fun messing with them.
Well, something else you have fun with, and I know that for a fact, is Blue Chew. Have some better sex with Blue Chew, why don't you? Blue Chew's the original brand offering chewable tablets. These erection-enhancing tablets help men achieve stronger, harder, longer-lasting erections for sexual activities. We're talking jackhammers. We're talking spears. We're talking the countdown. Let's get a little streak going. Blue Chew's putting its money where its mouth is and offering you a month for free. The process is simple. Just sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets, well, they're made right here in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door, and you can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. The best part is it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at BlueChew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try your first month of Blue Chew free. Just visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast. We got to talk a little bit.
Just barely made it back for that one.
In the nick of time. Listen, black boots, black trunks, bald heads. Maybe that's where the comparisons end with Stone Cold. But let's talk about what's next for Goldberg. We're in Biloxi on October 20th. And I want to remind everybody, this is the time when WCW is clearly the biggest wrestling company in the world. I mean, we're a month removed from Vince McMahon having a heart-to-heart with Bret Hart saying, I can't afford your contract anymore. WCW is just straight up kicking ass. But yet they're running a show in Biloxi with 5,900 fans. I'm just saying, man, when this momentum hits, and by the way, I'm not saying that's not a great house. I'm just saying the number one company in the world probably wouldn't be running Biloxi, right, Eric?
Maybe, maybe not. Depends on routing. I mean, I'd have to go back and see what was going on the week before and the week after. It could have been if it was a house show. I heard that right.
No, it's Nitro.
Oh, it was a Nitro.
I'm just saying the idea is these buildings are booked so far in advance.
Yeah, that would. I was just going to say more than likely we had made a commitment, and it was like, well, let's just live up to it as opposed to canceling it. So that was probably the case.
I just think it's interesting that sometimes we all look back with rose-colored glasses and we just assume, oh, WCW ran the Georgia Dome and the United Center and 20 and 30,000 seaters every week. Well, that's not the case. Here's 5,900. Still a decent gate, 123 grand. Goldberg's going to get a little bit of a pop now, and we're only a month into him being on TV. He's going to tackle and suplex Wrath for the pin, and it only takes 20 seconds. Meltzer would say, don't think for a second that Goldberg doing the gimmick where he walks to the ring like Shamrock, with gloves like Shamrock, that WCW isn't doing an in-your-face gimmick. They're taking somebody with no name and creating their own Shamrock. And the WWF had their real thing, and they turned him into just another pro wrestler. Steve McMichael had a confrontation with Goldberg, and then McMichael then pinned Mortis with a tombstone in 456. So, listen, we know that we're going to get into Goldberg and McMichael. But the whole idea that you're trying to rip off or do an homage or there's any sort of connective tissue to Ken Shamrock is just silly to me. Like, that's not even close, right?
And again, it goes back to my, low quotient when it comes to critical thinking. Dave is just, as he's always done, and still to this day, he's just spewing bullshit for $14.99 a month. Good for him. You make money doing that. Good for you, man.
The Torch would even double down on this. Goldberg's gimmick is supposed to be that he's a UFC style hybrid fighter, but they've decided not to spell that out on TV for some reason. Thus far, he's come across more of a stone cold imitation. And that almost feels like Wade just reporting what he's read or heard from Dave.
Yeah, there was a lot of that going on. I mean, I was pretty hard on Wade for a long time. And I think several years ago, 3-4 years ago is when I started noticing it. Wade started becoming a little more objective and thorough and kind of was a pretty fresh feeling departure from the type of garbage that Dave Meltzer writes about. So, but there was a time when Keller was just like a bad imitation of Dave Meltzer. Like I said, he shifted gears. Much respect for him for doing it. He's now a legitimate writer. I won't call him a reporter necessarily. I don't think he positions himself necessarily as a quote unquote journalist the way Dave does. But, Wade is probably one of the more prominent writers of the people out there that cover professional wrestling. And I think he does a great job doing it now. He didn't back then. He was just a Dave light.
We sort of glossed over Goldberg pinning Wrath. Obviously, a real life Brian Clark, big badass dude, super jacked up, very recognizable. We've seen him as Adam Bomb. We've seen him in WCW. Do you remember anybody early on giving you any grief about putting over Goldberg? Like, it's one thing to lose a match. It's another to basically get squashed in 20 seconds, especially when, you've been on both channels. You're this big jacked up dude. Like, I could see how some guys might get territorial and say, I don't know if this is best for my character or my career. Do you remember any pushback about that early on?
Not to me, but I wouldn't have been on the front lines of it either. Kevin Sullivan might have been. Terry Taylor could have been. There were other people, working with Kevin that might have got an earful, but not to me, and especially not by Brian Clark, because Brian and I were friends, and he still is extremely professional. And if he would have had an issue with it, he wouldn't have come to me with it. He would have gone to Kevin Sullivan with it because he's a pro.
It's interesting too because there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen early on here with Goldberg in the newsletter. So you could tell that fans were interested in it because Dave and Wade were writing about it. Dave would say Ming and Goldberg was added as a surprise match on the Havoc pay-per-view. It's an internal deal of trying to get Goldberg over as a shooter by beating Ming. The problem with that theory is the only people who have a clue that Ming is tough are the boys themselves because of his ref, and fans just perceive him as another lowered card guy who's been around forever and doesn't mean anything. Now, what's interesting is this was reported multiple times, and of course, that match never happened. So there's the surprise match. Surprise, the match didn't happen.
Way to go, Dave.
What did happen?
Send you more money. Come on.
Alex Wright is going to be wrestling Steve Mongo McMichael at Halloween Havoc here.
I'm sorry, Alex.
Goldberg's going to do a run in and hit his jackhammer on Mongo while Deborah has distracted the referee. And it's written here, the ref was really clumsy here, and Goldberg's spot took forever to do. And then the ref had to act distracted for Deborah way too long. And he kept looking behind him, trying to be nonchalant about it until turning around until Goldberg left the ring. After the match, Deborah gave Goldberg Steve's Super Bowl ring. As Wright went to thank Goldberg, he decked Wright and gave him a jackhammer as well. Listen, I understood when we first read his first dark match that we remember seeing reported about in the newsletters being against Hector Guerrero. Hey, it makes sense to put him in there with a veteran. But man, Mongo and Goldberg together, these are two relatively green guys. That doesn't feel like the best decision, right?
I don't know that it was as bad as we're making it sound. Given what was laid out for that match, it was not something that neither Bill nor Steve were incapable of. Probably a little clumsy, and the fact that it wasn't well rehearsed added to that. But I don't think anybody had expectations of anything out of either Bill or Steve that would have given them pause and say, wait a minute, these guys they can't go out and do a 20-minute match. We better not put them in the scene. Bill was going out and doing what he had been doing. Steve was just tough enough to take it. And the clumsiness really had nothing to do with their inexperience as much as it had to do with lack of preparation on WCW's part in terms of making the talent rehearse and block the match, and a little bit of an inexperience from Deborah. Timing is such an important part, a critical part of a match. If it's off just a little bit, it can be really awkward on television. But I don't think putting either Steve or Bill in that situation was necessarily a bad choice.
The next day, we're going to do Nitro in San Diego. There's going to be a $104,000 gate there. It's the first ever event at the Cox Arena at San Diego State University. And there's a lot of screw ups here. The building was an absolute disaster live as far as not being ready for such an event. And there were refunds due to building screw ups. And in the entire building, there was only one payphone. So a real challenge. But again, this is a building that was probably booked well in advance of WCW and their incredible momentum here. Disco is supposed to be wrestling Bill Goldberg. Goldberg's going to get a big pop, but Alex Wright is going to attack Goldberg. Goldberg destroys him. And then he does the exact same thing to Disco Inferno, but the bell never rings. It wasn't an official match. Here comes Mongo. Mongo and Goldberg have a pull apart. I'm mentioning all this because Goldberg is getting a big time babyface reaction already, and we're only a month in. I mean, you guys had to tell fairly quickly. The camera loves him, and so does this live crowd, right?
That was evident during some of Bill's early dark matches. I mean, we weren't surprised at this point in time. We were not surprised at all that Bill was getting over because we had seen how well he got over in dark matches when nobody knew who he was, including the announcers. So it was fascinating and exciting, but it wasn't a surprise.
The torch would continue to say that WCW officials are not shy about bragging about the fact that Goldberg is more over than Ken Shamrock. Now, I don't know where he's hearing that, but there's a lot written about the fact that Goldberg is getting inspiration from Ken Shamrock. And the only thing I can think is perhaps someone in the WCW office, and I'm just asking, I don't know, because I'm trying to make sense of why Wade and Dave keep going back to this. Do you think there was anybody in WCW who was really high on Ken Shamrock and felt like for whatever reason that the WWF had dropped the ball with him?
Absolutely not. I don't remember ever hearing Ken Shamrock's name, and this is no disrespect to Ken Shamrock. This has everything to do with the fact that WCW was leaving WWE in the freaking dust, and there was nothing there in WWE that we were looking at and going, wow, I wish we had that. It doesn't make any sense if you think about it. We were pretty full of ourselves. Maybe we should have been looking, but we weren't. That's the fun part of listening to what Dave writes or what Wade during this period wrote, because they're just both desperate to come up with shit because they don't know anything. So they make it up. They feed off of each other, apparently, at this point in time. But no, none of that is true. Again, that's the, low critical thinking quotient thing again, is all that really is. It's like people sitting at home going, maybe they're doing this because, I got it, because of Ken Shamrock. Let's rate that. I mean, that's how juvenile some of this stuff is that was being written at the time by both Wade and your buddy, Dave Meltzer.
Yeah, he is a good guy. I wanted to ask you about something else because, man, this gets reported about, and it feels like every year somebody brings it back up. So here's our 2025 time to bring it up. WCW is going to be doing a tough man division with the likes of Benoit, Finlay, Goldberg, McMichael, Ming, and others, and creating a world championship in the division. I think we've talked about this a little bit in various different forms, that you had ideas for guys like Tank Abbott and things like that. It feels like this was an idea that, you guys kicked around a few times, but it never actually came to fruition. Do you remember anything about this?
I don't. But again, it doesn't mean that it wasn't discussed or attempted. I just wouldn't have been involved in it. Kevin, Terry, any number of other people on the booking committee at that time may have looked at our roster and said, hey, what if we try this? Here's some guys that can't go out and have, Eddie Guerrero type matches. They're just big, tough, powerful guys. Let's put them in a division and have it's a hardcore division. It's what you just described, at least the way I heard it. It's just another name for a hardcore division, maybe with some different packaging, prettier ribbon, different ribbon, maybe not prettier, just different. It's essentially the same thing. Let's take these guys who are badasses, physically tough, that don't have a lot of experience, that can't go out there and put out a good, solid 20, 30-minute match. Let's create a division and the style of matches that are suitable for them and see if it works. Could that have happened? I hope so, because that would be an example of, thinking creatively and trying something new and different, or adjusting and coming up with something in a way to use people that you aren't otherwise using them. That's just good thinking. But it never reached me. That I'm sure of.
I didn't want to ask.
It never elevated to the point where we were serious about doing it.
Yeah.
You know how many things get talked about? Like, have you ever sat in a booking meeting, like an all-dayer? Oh my God. All kinds of ideas. There's a saying, there's no such thing as a bad idea when you're in a creative meeting. Trust me, there's a million of them that get tossed around in the course of the day. Could somebody have ended up talking to either Wade or Dipshit Dave and said, yeah, a tough day today. We're talking about this. We're talking about that. Yeah, it's possible, but it doesn't mean that they were serious conversations.
I got to ask you about the Starrcade match. Starrcade 1997. If you think the worst thing on that show was the finish of the main event, it was actually Goldberg and Steve McMichael. It got -1 star in the Observer. It went 6 minutes, and that was probably 5 minutes too long. One of the worst table spots you ever saw. Meltzer would say, unfortunately, they started brawling in the aisle. Unfortunately, they wound up in the ring. There was no heat at all because it was the deaf, dumb, and blind leading the blind. It ended up in the spot where Goldberg punched McMichael, who fell through a table set up at ringside, and there was a small ECW chant. Not sure if they were mocking it, but they should have been. Since it was the weakest table spot in history, when Michael got in the ring selling his back, he tried his tombstone pile driver, but he couldn't hold Goldberg, who then finished McMichael off with the jackhammer. It was hideous. Yeah, listen, maybe we should have just, I mean, at this point, this feels like a deviation. You know, we've been giving him 20-second wins a lot on TV. And I know that maybe Mongo wouldn't have wanted to do that, but man, what the fans want to see is not a 6-minute match from Goldberg. They want wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, don't they?
They do. And to be fair to Bill, who'd only been in the business for 2 cups of coffee and a burrito at that point in time, he didn't have the experience. He shouldn't have been in that match. It was a bad decision.
I can't help but ask you about this, because we're starting to see the rise of Goldberg here as we cruise into early 98, and we know in just a handful of months, man, he's going to have so much momentum, and then we know what happens in July at the Georgia Dome. So we're talking less than a year from his debut until he becomes the top guy. And I bring that up because these days there's a lot of discussion about who's a good wrestler and who's not a good wrestler. I guess some under oath testimony from Stephanie McMahon leaked last week, and people were having some fun with it, where she was basically saying Hulk Hogan wasn't a good wrestler. And people just got all over it. I mean, he's easily the most recognizable wrestler in the world. And there's a discussion about whether or not he was any good as a wrestler. And I don't know, man, just that makes me laugh, because we would all sort of agree in the internet wrestling community, well, Bill Goldberg wasn't a great wrestler, but that doesn't matter. Like, if you want to see the best boxing in the world and you're really not wanting to concern yourself with clouded judgment of performance enhancing drugs and big paydays and, you know, fixed fights and promoters and pay-per-view and ticket sales, hey man, go watch Olympic boxing. That's what that is. But the minute you start putting it on pay-per-view and you start a promotion and you start selling tickets and merch, the actual skill of being a wrestler and having a great match, like, who would say The Rock is one of the best wrestlers ever? I mean, when
he's not.
That's what I mean.
And neither was Steve Austin.
No.
They were just the biggest stars who made the most money.
Like the things that drew Steve Austin the most money were swearing, middle fingers, drinking
a beer. And I'm good at all of those things. And I never made that much money.
That's what I'm saying. It's not, you know, technical holds and, you know, 450 splashes and crazy suplexes. And by the way, I'm a fan of all of wrestling, but I just think it's interesting that it becomes this, hey, I know he sold more tickets and generated more revenue, but he wasn't very good. It's like, what the fuck is that? Like, this is a business.
Again, you're bringing me back to why I have so much fun. People ask me, like, wow, man, you're 70 years old. Why are you still, you know, fucking with Dave Meltzer? And what's wrong with you? And it's like, first of all, it's fun for me. It's my hobby. I don't play golf. It's too cold outside here in Wyoming right now anyway. Even if I did, I'd still do it. But number one, it's easy and it's fun. And it's fun to watch these people react. But if you, I sound like I'm picking on AEW, and I really don't want to do that. But it's one of the challenges when you come out and say, AEW, we're the best wrestler. Well, define best. What does best mean to you? It's a very individual perception based on your own biases. You perceive someone to be the best because they do things that are very, very athletic and you find stimulating. So you think that person is the best. Let's pick, I don't know, Will Ospreay. I'm a fan. I enjoy watching Will Ospreay wrestle. He's a million miles from the best because he's not drawing any money. He's not drawing ratings. He's not drawing anything. He's really, really good at what he does. But he's certainly not the best wrestler, because my definition of best wrestler is about the business of the wrestling business, because without the business, there is no wrestling. My idea of the best wrestler, and this is not my quote, but the best worker in a business is the guy that makes, or gal that makes the most money. That's it. That's the best. If you're in the professional wrestling industry, just like if you're in the movie industry.
Hang on, Eric. I want to tag in on something you're saying there. I think you're going down the me and you. I think I speak Eric sometimes.
Yes.
And I think what you're saying there about the best wrestler is the one who makes the most money. You don't mean the best wrestler is the one who negotiates the best contract for himself, although there is an argument for that. I think what you mean is the best wrestler is the one who generates the most revenue.
Better way of saying it. Thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
Stone Cold Steve, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin. So Steve Austin is going to tell you he's the best technical wrestler out there. Neither would Hulk Hogan, but you can go back and look at some Steve Austin matches and you'll know that he had injuries along the way, but at one point in time, he could go out there and bang with anybody.
Yes.
He could chain wrestle with you. He could do all that stuff. He just couldn't make any money doing it. But when Stone Cold Steve Austin emerged and that character came to life, the character is what drew the money, not the moves inside of the ring. And that's where the Dave Meltzers of the world and his little cult of creepy wrestling fans that follow him and believe everything he says, that's where they fall apart, because they don't understand the business of the business. And since they perceive the Will Ospreys of the world to be the best based on what they like, their bias, and they're completely ignorant of, when I say ignorant, lack of information and knowledge, I don't mean it to sound derisive. It is, but it's lack of information and knowledge. They have no insight as to how the business really works. Their only insight is their perception of what it is somebody does that they like. And that's why the internet is such a fun community. And you get such intelligent dialogue.
It's just fascinating to me to take a look and see a guy like Goldberg here who's getting, he is less than a year from starting wrestling school, and he's already getting big reactions and big pops. And when we step out of that comfort zone of what's working and we ask him to go wrestle a 6-minute match on pay-per-view with Mongo, it's just not good. But we come back on like January 12th in Jacksonville. We got a sell out there, 8,700 fans, and he's going to wrestle Jerry Flynn. They had just done this match at a worldwide taping, and it was so hot and well received, they decided to do it on Nitro. And man, it was awesome. Flynn even cut Goldberg's tongue with a sidekick to Goldberg's face. They're working really, really stiff. They're trying some submission holds. It only goes 1 minute and 23 seconds. And Dave says the opener was a great UWF style match as Bill Goldberg beat Jerry Lynn in 124. And he says the idea is, Wade wrote this. This is about as real looking as a worked pro wrestling match gets. And that's what's working. Like, I want to read that again. This is about as real looking as a worked pro wrestling match gets. We want to believe, Eric.
Yep.
We want to get lost in it. And it becomes an expose when you have Goldberg and McMichael trying to do things they're really not ready to do.
Can I jump in there?
It takes us out of it is where I was going. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it does take us out of it. But going back to, but specifically your comment towards Bill and McMichael in that match, and the fact that it fell apart and it did neither of them any good, and in my opinion was a mistake. I'll take the responsibility. It happened under my watch. Might not have been my idea, or it might have been, but it was my responsibility, so it doesn't fucking matter. My bad. Part of what made the decision, whoever it was, worse, and this is where Bill was really vulnerable in a way. Bill knew what he didn't know. Bill was very aware that he was green. He was doing something it's completely out of his element. It's 180 degrees opposite of what he's been doing since he was 6 years old in terms of the way he approaches his performance. He handled all that pretty well. The part he didn't handle too well is you had 3 or 4 or 5 people in his ear at all times. And the real lack of experience that got to Bill at that point in time wasn't necessarily the lack of experience in the ring. It was his lack of experience in being able to sift through the people that were trying to influence him. Some were good people that were looking out for him. They may have bad perspectives. They may have suggested some things that weren't necessarily 100% right, but their intention was. But there were also people in Bill's ear that were really excited to see him fall. They want to see him fail because it's more likely that they'll be in that spot that he's in. And I don't want to give the impression that that was like really prevalent, but it existed, and it certainly existed with Bill. That was one of the biggest challenges with Bill. He didn't have enough of his own experience to go, oh, that's bullshit. He didn't know. And therefore, he would listen to a lot of people, and not everybody had Bill's best interest at heart.
Well, we know we've got your best interest at heart, and I know you believe in this one. I can't wait to talk about the perfect gene. Let's talk about jeans for a second. Eric and I both recently got a pair from the perfect gene, and they basically are the unicorn of jeans. They fit like a dream. They look fantastic, and they're so comfy that you kind of forget you're even wearing pants. In case you didn't know, this is an ad, and the perfect gene told me to say this. But I wouldn't lie about how awesome these jeans are. They really do live up to the name. Picture this, 700,000 pairs of nuts rescued from bad jeans. That's 2 per dude. The hero, the perfect gene. Say goodbye to stiff cardboard denim and hello to comfort. These jeans are going to fit you like they were custom made. They'll stretch like you wouldn't believe, and they look fantastic. The fabric is as soft as a baby's bottom, but there were no babies involved, we promise. And they're durable enough to survive pulling them down on the daily. Yeah, the perfect jean has a seriously massive range of sizes, from 6 fits, from skinny to thick. Waist sizes from 26 to 50, and lengths from 26 to 38. So it doesn't matter if you're a short king, a thick daddy, or something in between. You can find the perfect fit for the body you're rocking. And for a limited time, you can get 15% off your first order and free shipping at theperfectgene.nyc. Or just Google the perfect gene and use the code 83weeks15 and you'll get 15% off. By the way, the perfect gene doesn't stop there though. They've also revolutionized t-shirts. The perfect tee has just enough stretch to hide the beer belly, but also accentuate your arms and chest for that flawless look. It's as soft as butter without shrinking in the wash like all your other tees. Did I mention the perfect gene always has free shipping, exchanges, and returns? So you've got some peace of mind knowing that your order is completely risk-free. It's finally time to stop crushing your balls in uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectgene.nyc. Our listeners get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use the code 83weeks15 at checkout. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with the promo code 83weeks15. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Fuck your khakis and get the perfect gene.
I wear those when I fly.
Do you really? That's your go-to?
Did you ever get on a plane and see people show up, they're wearing their pajamas?
Yep.
It's like, I mean, it looks tacky as fuck, but it's comfortable. Yes. So I can kind of relate. Because at the end of the day, when you're flying, everything else is so miserable. At least you want to be comfortable when you're in a plane. And I can't get myself to wear my pajamas because some asshole will be taking pictures and putting it on the internet, and it would look horrible. However, my perfect tees are just as comfortable as pajamas, and I save them. I wear them on flights all the time. You'll see, I'll be wearing them in Huntsville.
Check it out, man. Go look up the perfect gene. And then be sure to use the code 83weeks15. You'll be glad you did. So listen, we're talking about what's working with Goldberg here. You know, I said fans want to believe. Like, we wanted to believe that Mike Tyson was the biggest badass on the planet. He's the baddest man on the planet. He can knock everybody out. He's unbeatable, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, we find out, well, maybe some of that's not true. But, man, while we believed, the world stood still when he fought, man. He was a pay-per-view juggernaut, just eclipsing record after record after record. And it feels like that's what we're trying to do with Goldberg. But man, when we deviate from these short bursts, like I remember my parents when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. So it was a big deal for them to say, hey, we're going to buy this $40 pay-per-view or whatever it is. And I remember it being like, hey, you can't go to the bathroom or get a drink. You may blink and miss it. This is before DVRs. We could all just, oh, well, let me just rewind it or let me pause that. You had to be in the room because you knew Mike Tyson's going to knock somebody out and it's going to be quick. But when we deviate from that, it's not as good. And that is a prime example of what happened on WCW Saturday night. Mike Tenay and Scott Hudson are doing commentary for Goldberg and Ming. It's the main event, and they go about 6 minutes. Goldberg gets blown up and accidentally drops Ming on his head. And of all the people you could accidentally drop on their head, Ming would be near the top of the list of guys I wouldn't want to do that to. And then he does a move with Jimmy Hart, and he's going to lose control of Jimmy, who's on the top rope, ready to take a big bump for Goldberg. And he drops Jimmy on his head. So now Tenay and Hudson are trying to make some chicken salad. This is it's a tough go, man. But thankfully it's on Saturday night. It's not on Nitro. As crazy as that sounds, you know, you wouldn't want this on Nitro. It is a smaller audience. It's not quite the same thing. But when you're seeing, hey, we tried a 6-minute match with him at Starrcade and it just died, and then we did it again here with Ming, and now Ming and Jimmy nearly died. We got to get back to the basics. We need some more of that Mike Tyson shit, right, Eric?
Yeah, and this, while you're explaining all this and covering it, it brings something to mind. Had Bill gone to WWE, which almost happened, by the way. I'm going to back this up. I'm going to back up a little story in the timeline here. But when, and I don't remember who it was. It might have been Steve Borden staying or Lex, because Bill worked out at the gym. There was some kind of a connection. Steve or Lex or DDP or whoever it was who knew Bill from the Main Event Fitness facility that Sting and Lex Luger both own jointly, are the ones that set up my initial meeting with Bill. But I was a little busy in '97. I was running really ragged. And every time I had, I had a meeting set up with Bill and I had to, reschedule it. And I maybe spent 2 or 3 days before I got back to Bill. And Bill got very impatient. And I remember getting a phone call from somebody, I don't remember who it was. It said, look, if you don't have time, that's great. He's going to go to WWE and take a shot there. I went, all right, let me get to this. Because I given my word to somebody that was setting it up that I would get to it right away. And I felt bad that I let it slip for however long I let it slip. And I got a hold of Bill and we, patched it up real quick and he joined WCW. Had Bill gone to WWE, WWE would have done what WCW failed to do. I'm guessing they may have, who knows if they would have or not. If they would have introduced Bill the same way we did and turned him into that short match killer, taking advantage of the same thing we took advantage of, they would have seen the same thing too. And it's likely they might have done the same thing, possible. But while they were doing the same thing we were doing, they would have also made sure that Bill was training, much like they did with Kurt Angle, who came in as an Olympic gold medalist and all the athletic abilities in the world, but no professional wrestling training. Kurt threw himself into training to become a professional wrestler and became one of the very best in extremely short order. Had WCW done that same thing with Bill and trained him, now it would have required a big commitment from Bill because Bill would have been training 3, 4, 5 hours a day, but giving Bill the skill set so that when it was time for him to have this 6-minute match with Ming or whomever, or Steve McMichael even, Bill would have had more confidence. He would have had more of a repertoire. He would have been capable of doing more stuff. He would have been better at selling without dying, which is an art form in and itself. It takes just a lot of time to develop that skill set and that feel. It's not a skill, it's a feel. And you don't get that feel until you're out there doing it. You can study film and all that, and that's helpful, but you don't really learn how to sell until you've developed that experience by doing it and getting the right reaction when you do. All that being said, while I'm grateful that Bill ended up in WCW. The truth is, had he ended up in WWE, he would have had a different, and I dare say, more successful career, because he would have had the tools to work with that were never developed in WCW, especially by the time we were demanding those skills from him and putting him in situations that he wasn't capable of executing.
Man,
how's that for honesty? How's that for just cutting through the bullshit? As Larry would say, bullshit.
By the way, Larry is my father. Eric has hung out with my dad. My dad has a Southern drawl. You think I got a Southern accent? Listen to my dad talk. We got a lot to talk about here, because I do want to mention the more infamous match. People have been waiting on us to talk about this for quite a while. February 9th, El Paso, Texas. There's 9,085 fans here, and it's Bill Goldberg and Steve Regal. We're not doing another squash match. It's 5 minutes and 1 second. Simply put, it doesn't matter the opponent. Goldberg's matches have to be 90 seconds. He was totally exposed here, and everyone in the crowd saw it with their own two eyes. There's some heat on Regal because they thought he was kind of exposing him, since Regal is a legitimate shooter as opposed to a paper shooter. But Regal was just doing a wrestling match, and Goldberg only has 3 spots, and his quick burst of intensity is lost doing almost anything else. The fans were chanting Goldberg here. They're popping for the entrance. And the announcers, including Bobby Heenan, are trying to sell this as being Goldberg's toughest test to date. And Regal goes for a single leg. Goldberg won't go down. When Goldberg takes Regal down, Regal reaches the ropes, but kicks Goldberg in the face as Goldberg is breaking the hold. Goldberg was legitimately stunned for a minute, and the match had several instances that looked like legit mini battles, with Regal testing Goldberg's mat skills and shooting on him a bit. Regal refused to take a swing into the ropes at one point. In the ring, Regal did the job after a tackle and a jackhammer. It was an interesting match. And there's been a lot written about this. Regal has talked about this a lot too. When we eventually got through the match and got to the back, straight away, Bill apologized to me. This is what Regal wrote. Something else he seemed to forget about later when he retold the story. Quote, "I'm sorry. I just didn't know what to do out there. We had a chat, shook hands, and everything was fine. Then Eric came in and started chewing Bill out, which I took as my cue to leave. Then I was called into the office in front of Eric and the people who laid out the match. Eric was screaming, going absolutely berserk. I told him, Eric, I can't hit myself. It's not my fault. How do you expect someone who's never wrestled for more than a minute and a half to go out and do 6 minutes? He won't know what to do. That was the truth of it. It wasn't Bill's fault. I'd always liked Bill because he was always nice to me. And ever since that match, every time I've seen him, he's gone out of his way to shake my hand and even hug me, always. But I haven't seen him since he wrote about that match in his book, and he slagged me off for it. I thought he was more of a man than that. If he had a problem with that match, he could have come and confronted me about it at any time. We must have met 100 times since it happened, and he never said anything to me about it, not until he printed it in his book. The incident earned a night of bollocking off Eric Bischoff. I've always gotten on well with Eric, but I know that he could have gotten sick of me by then. He was right, too. He knew what I could do, and he saw me wasting my talent and not doing it. Eric was always straight with me. If he didn't like something, he'd tell me, and I was the same with him. So let's talk about this. This is an interesting time for Bill. He's maybe not in his best physical shape. He's not taking care of himself. He's maybe...
You meant Steve. You meant Steve.
Steve, my apologies. Steve Regal is, he doesn't like his physical self. He's not at his peak. He's just not focused. And some of that is he's got some substance stuff going on at the time, which he's been open about and written about in his book. But this match has just developed a life of its own. But what a lot of people I don't think talk about is that when they came back through the curtain, Goldberg apologized to Regal, and then both Goldberg and Regal got blessed out by you. What do you remember about this?
I remembered exactly the way Steve wrote about it. What I didn't know at the time, I'm going to be careful how I say this. Look, I'm not
have to. This is out there. Let me help you with this. I don't mean to cut you off. I know you hate that, but Regal did a podcast with us at Podcast Heat, and he said he did exactly what he was told to do.
by the agent.
He didn't name the agent at the time, but fast forward to a couple of months ago, Arn Anderson has finally admitted that he was the agent on this. He was standing by and giving the instructions to Regal and told him to go out there and, see what he can do. Well, he did. And it wound up working against what you wanted for the vision. So that was a big mystery for a long time, but Arn has said, hey, I was the agent for the match. So if you were going to tiptoe around that, Arn's revealed that on his podcast. You don't have to do that anymore.
Good. Well, I appreciate that because I wouldn't do that. I had a long conversation with Steve about this situation long after it took place, like maybe a year or two ago. We had a very long conversation about it because it was important to Steve. I had forgotten all about it, but it was important to Steve because Steve felt like he let me down, he let the company down, and Steve knew that I didn't have all the information because Arn at that time, who was in that room, didn't speak up, didn't take any responsibility, allowed me to think that the match was laid out properly based on what we were expecting from the match. And it wasn't. Steve was told one thing, Bill was told and expecting another. That's not Steve's fault. That's not Bill's fault. That was Arn's fault. It's water under the bridge now. We've all grown. We've all changed. We've all morphed and evolved. And it's not worth carrying around one measure of anger or anything like that. It just was what it was at the time, but it was a very unfortunate situation for everybody involved.
It's interesting because I don't think everybody remembers this part, and here's what's written in the torch. Eric Bischoff was upset with Steven Regal for his lack of cooperation in the match with Goldberg and fired him on the flight afterwards. No word on whether or not it was one of Bischoff's 30-minute firings or if it's premature, but there was no sign of Regal on live TV since then. And then a couple of weeks later, it would be reported in the torch, Eric Bischoff did indeed give Steve Regal his 90-day notice, apparently in great part due to his conduct in the Goldberg match, but some suspect it was due to Regal not being in quote-unquote wrestling shape recently and having some health problems. Regal had a contract with the 90-day rollovers, so he's working dates until his 90 days are up. And Meltzer would say, oh, I'm not so sure about that. And then a week later, reveal, yep, Steve Regal, Bobby Walker, Vincent, and David Taylor were all given pink slips, meaning that when their 90-day rollover expires, they'll be let go. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Regal, since once he gets back in shape, he's going to be one of the most talented wrestlers in the business. I suspect the WWF would be very interested in him if he got in great shape again. No doubt his match with Goldberg was a catalyst in this happening. And the torch would say that it was largely due to this match and him not being in the best shape. Now we know that, and we didn't know this at the time, maybe you did, but the internet wrestling community didn't know that Regal was really struggling in his personal life. But the narrative is that he got fired because of this match. Is that true, Eric?
It was a combination. It was the challenges Steve was facing, but more than anything, it had nothing to do with him being out of shape. I would never fire at someone for being out of shape. I may say something to them. Tony Schiavone will tell you all about that, but I would never fire somebody for it. That had nothing to do with it. I would say it was 75% of the match and knowing that there were other issues involved.
As a reminder, and we're not, this is all written about in Regal's book, so we're not trashing Regal. I think you and I both think a lot of Regal, so that's not what this is at all. But a year prior, he did have an incident on an airplane. And so if you've got an incident on an airplane, which makes you think, hey, maybe he's got some stuff he needs to get together. Maybe he's not in the best shape. And now he maybe exposes a guy you really started to develop some plans for.
Well, and I'm led to believe that it was his choice to go out and expose that guy. So it looked like, oh yeah, I'll show you what Bill Goldberg's really worth. That was the perception that was created for me. It's really Look, remember what I said earlier when there was a lot of people that were in Bill's ear and not all of them had his best interest in mind? I'm not saying that this was that example, but it's an example of that example.
It is crazy to think, that because let's just talk about what a fucking man Regal is. He does exactly what's asked of him.
Yes.
And now he's getting fired for it. He don't say shit.
Yep.
He just took it.
Yep.
Now listen, a lot of people in the world will not be willing to let go of their 6-figure gig, their dream gig, based on a lie. But rather than rat out one of the boys, because that was the perception,
Yep.
he just took it.
Yep. Which is also why to this day in public, including this podcast, it's Mr. Regal.
Yes, sir.
And people wonder why I have the level of respect. It's about what he accomplished in the ring and what I know he's capable of doing. And I see him doing in WWE. I saw it a couple months ago, a month and a half ago when I was down at NXT. He's an incredibly valuable asset to the wrestling industry, specifically right now, WWE. That's not why I call him Mr. Regal. He's Mr. Regal to me because of what you just said.
That's some man shit, man. You know what? That's cool. I don't know how you don't hear that story and have more respect for Mr. Regal on the other side of it.
Because he doesn't talk about it.
Yeah. And never did, which is crazy. Even when I mean, if you were in the circle, you knew, but like it was just this big mystery. And now we could put all the pieces together. I do want to spend just a minute and talk about how the mainstream was starting to pick up on Goldberg. Just a couple of weeks after this Regal match, he's got a big story in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, these days, that's probably not that big a deal. But boy, in 1998, having coverage in a major newspaper like that, talking about one of your talents, that's a big deal. And it's not the only person writing about him. Of course, Mike Mooneyham has his wrestling column, but I'm saying bigger than that. The Baltimore Jewish Times picks up a story here in March of 1998. And they're saying, here's the title: Jewish Muscle. Bill Goldberg makes his local wrestling debut next Wednesday at the Baltimore Arena. And it's a female writer. Amanda is writing, he's 6'4", 285 pounds of solid muscle and bench presses 500 pounds. He's the last guy you'd ever want to bump into in a dark alley. And he's coming to the Baltimore Arena on March 25th. Professional wrestler Bill Goldberg gives new meaning to the phrase nice Jewish boy. When he's in the ring, he may be Jewish, but he's not very nice. Man, what a great story. I mean, you couldn't buy this sort of coverage, and it's totally free. I mean, this is checking another box from a marketing standpoint, and I know people are going to be upset about that, but if you're getting this sort of free press, man, what a blessing this is. But did you even consider the fact that, hey, wait a minute, we may excite a Jewish fan base for WCW we've never really been able to market to?
I never thought about that going in because I don't think about marketing towards segments of audience based on race or religion.
Right.
Take that back. I do think about demographics. I have always thought about demographics because you're catering to that world and you have to satisfy the needs and desires of advertisers. In that respect, of course, we're looking for African-American viewers. We're looking for Hispanic viewers. But nobody ever said to me, hey, Eric, what about the Jewish viewer? That never comes up in conversation, or you don't see it much in media. But here's what I figured out. Holy crap. There's a whole lot of Jewish wrestling fans out there that had been gotten excited about wrestling that hadn't been excited about wrestling in a long, long time because now they've got a hero too. It became very, very obvious after the fact. Again, not by design, by default. And I was thrilled with it.
I want to mention this because this is in that same article that's written in Baltimore. Although Mr. Goldberg originally wanted to be known as, I'm probably going to butcher this, so my apologies, the Mossad, the name of the Israeli intelligence agency, he ended up keeping his given name. That wasn't my intention in the beginning. I didn't think it would work, but I'm very lucky to have gotten the support I have using a nice Jewish name like Bill Goldberg. As a Southern Baptist from Alabama, I did not know what the Mossad was, but the name of the Israeli intelligence agency. Is there a scenario where Turner Broadcasting would have allowed you to use that name, do you think, in 1997? Do you remember that ever even being discussed? Because this is the first I'm hearing of it.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever heard it too. So let's just kind of acknowledge the fact that maybe it did or didn't happen.
Okay.
But I don't ever remember hearing that before. This is the first time I've heard this as well. Again, could have been something that Bill thought about and shared with somebody privately, driving down the road. I don't know. As far as whether or not Turner would have had an issue with it, I doubt it. There wasn't a heightened sense of political correctness at the time in Turner. And simply referring to yourself as, the Israeli version of the CIA isn't necessarily offensive to anybody. So I doubt it would have been an issue, but I also don't know that it ever really happened either. So we'll let it stand as a possibility.
Well, something we know is happening, and I'm so pumped for this. It's happening this weekend. Prize Picks, man. It's the best place to get real money action, real money sports action. We're talking more than 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. That makes Prize Picks the daily fantasy sports platform accessible to all. And it's so easy and fun to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot up to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. And as we're starting to get really fired up for the playoffs, because the conference championships are this weekend, and we're pumped to be a Prize Picks partner. I've had a lot of fun with Prize Picks this season. I know you have too, Eric. And this weekend, man, it's a collision course. The Chiefs and the Bills. Can Josh Allen get it done? Is it Patrick Mahomes' time yet again? Are we going to see Tay at the Super Bowl? And then on the other side, it's all about the NFC East, man. Can the former Redskins, the Commanders, can they get there with their young quarterback? Jalen Hurts has something to say about that with the Eagles. And it really is that simple. You could say, do you think Daniels is going to have more or less than 2 touchdowns? Do you think Jalen Hurts is going to have more than 30 yards on the ground? What's Saquon Barkley going to do? There's lots of different things that you can play with and have fun with. And Prize Picks is just the best way to get in on the action here in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and even Florida. Join over 10 million members and sign up today. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money, even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And the big game is almost here, guys. It's now or never. Don't miss out on the last football game of the season with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the big game. Prize Picks is also giving away a free pick for the big game, where one of the starting quarterbacks will only need to throw 1 yard to win. How about that? If you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you can win real cash. I've had fun with this. You will too. Go download the app today. Use our code 83weeks, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's worth repeating. Download the app today. Prize Picks. Use our code 83weeks, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. So listen, let's talk about what's going on in the torch here. This is going to come out in early April. Goldberg merchandise is in production, and WCW is anticipating a boon in the already record merchandise sales when his stuff comes out. Goldberg's been getting rave reviews from management for his business sense, his intelligence, and his drive, but he still has a lot to prove to the locker room in terms of his ability to sell for mid-card and upper-card wrestlers who he will soon be facing regularly. And I got to say, WCW's merchandise game definitely got upped in a big way in 1998 when compared to 96 and even 97. And you've said for a long time that you felt like this was an area that WCW was way behind the WWF. How did you start to close the gap here? In 98, we don't just have the black and white NWO shirts, but we've got the Wolfpack coming. Sting's been one of the hottest merch sellers. Diamond Dallas Page shirts are starting to fly off the shelves. We're going to start to see Chris Jericho and Monday Night Jericho shirts. But now the Goldberg stuff, like these shirts and that was the primary thing. Clearly there was other merch, but shirts were probably your number one merch item. Would you agree with that, Eric?
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
What changed from 97 to 98? How did it become more of an initiative than before?
I think we got better at reacting. We weren't planning. There was no, for example, in early 97, when we started seeing Goldberg taking off and getting hot, that would have been a great time to bring some really talented people in and start developing merch ideas. Again, out of 100 ideas, maybe only 3 of them will be viable, something you really want to invest in. That's okay. And when you're in an advanced planning mode, you have plenty of time to get ahead of success, so that when success occurs, you've got the merchandise, you've got the distribution in place, you even have the advertising and a promotion in place. Take a look at Penta, WWE recently. Perfect example. That's advanced planning. His merchandise came out before he did.
It's true, but I love the phrase.
But it's, you know what I mean? That's a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. WCW never got that. Ever developed that level of planning and architecture to their merchandising program. What we did get good at is reacting. The problem with reacting is you miss 30 or 40% of the market. Because by the time you finally go, okay, it's time to get some merchandise. How long is it going to take to get merchandise? Well, by the time we actually get it, it's going to be 3 months. You're burning daylight. Your lost opportunity value there is very high because you're not pre-planning. So we got good at reacting. We could capitalize on something 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months after it got hot. But we never did develop the kind of expertise that WWE started with. Never really had a mature licensing and merchandising program. We had a licensing and licensing and merchandising division that was forced to react, but never learned how to develop.
I can't wait for us to talk about this next piece, because this is something that you and I've never discussed. And I know that we've talked about a lot of Goldberg topics in the past, but even when we talked about the Regal match, we could never really talk about it the way we did today. Well, this, I think, is another one of those things. Let's jump right into it. It's reported in the Observer here, and this is in early April. There's now talk of bringing back Ric Flair and reintroducing a new 4 Horsemen, with Arn Anderson as the spokesperson and Bill Goldberg as one of the members, largely to put Goldberg in the spotlight, but still protect the public from seeing his weaknesses. This is similar to what Dusty Rhodes did with Luger back in 1987, where he was groomed to be the next Hogan, to stand in the background and watch and learn all the tricks of the trade from Ric Flair. Even the Torch would say plans are now locked in for Arn to return to an on-air role as a spokesperson for the Horsemen. Flair will be the veteran leader of the group of wrestlers, while Goldberg will be the young anchor. Dean Malenko is expected to fill the 3rd spot when he returns, which could now be May or June. And Steve McMichael, who seems to have fallen out of favor with management, isn't expected to be a part of the group. Chris Benoit has a 30-70 chance of being in the group, since WCW wants him to be in the group with Bret Hart, the British Bulldog, and Jim Neidhart in a Team Canada faction. Benoit's been wearing Bret Hart t-shirts to the ring lately, and a number of other names have been speculated. From Eddie Guerrero to Chris Jericho to Kurt Hennig. Expect Hennig to remain with the NWO, though. Now, so there's a discussion. We're going to bring back, this is in April of 98. We're going to bring back Arn Anderson, and he's going to be the spokesperson, much like JJ was once upon a time, maybe. And we did see that much later in the year in Greenville. But the other members, we know that Benoit is going to be there, and we know that Malenko is going to be there. But the idea that one of those guys was supposed to be Bill Goldberg, I didn't know about. And I almost sort of chuckled at and said, that couldn't have been. But then I want to throw this at you. WCW announced the previous Monday that Flair would be on Thunder on April 9th in Tallahassee, Florida, to make an announcement concerning his career. Remember that now. They're teasing on Nitro. Tune into Thunder. Ric Flair is going to make a major announcement concerning his career. The idea was for Flair to announce the formation of the new 4 Horsemen. At the time, the plans were to include Bill Goldberg, Lex Luger, and one other individual, not Chris Benoit, whose spot hasn't completely finalized, with Arn Anderson returning as the manager of the group. Flair worked the house shows on April 7th and 8th in Fort Myers and Fort Pierce, Florida, and when given tickets for the tour, was given tickets to fly home late Wednesday night. And as such, he had made plans to go to Detroit the next morning, where his 9-year-old son, Reed Flair, was going to be competing in his age group of Freestyle Wrestling Nationals from the 9th to the 11th. Well, we know this is the time where he doesn't show. He no-shows Thunder. There's the big hullabaloo about the jet and the costs. And I think as the story goes, the only way for him to make it to Thunder would have been if you guys sent a private plane. And I guess you said, hey, we'll split it with you. Rick was offended, saying you wouldn't make Hogan split it. I'm not coming. But had he been there, had this Thunder announcement actually happened, would he have reformed the Horsemen? And do you think there's even a snowball's chance that Goldberg could have been one of those members in April of 98?
I don't recall this, but it sounds very reasonable to me.
Yeah.
And I would have supported it. So it's likely true, or at least a good portion of it. Again, it's a report from a dirt sheet, so you got to be careful how much of it you bite on. But in this case, it's plausible and not a bad idea. So I could see how it was either discussed or planned. Would have been interesting. Because it's a kind of a good casting, right? If you've got Ric Flair and Bill Goldberg in the same faction, and of course this is kind of not good casting, but if Rick being the senior, the elder statesman of the Four Horsemen, still very active, well respected, all that, but he's the veteran, and you have this young, explosive, unpredictable, undisciplined human killing machine in Bill Goldberg. I could just see a scenario where part of the toughest part of Rick's job is keeping Bill under control until it gets to a point where Ric Flair goes, okay, go get him. Sick him, brother. That would have been kind of cool. I could see that dynamic. And it would have been a great way to take advantage of Rick's veteran status because he's the wise man. He's seen all this shit. Bill just wants to go destroy everything in his path. Well, there's a time to do that. There's a time not to do that. Rick could have been that guy managing that piece of artillery. Would have been kind of cool, which is why I could see it happening. But I honestly don't remember it. Likely because I wasn't involved in a discussion other than going, cool, that sounds great. And maybe that happened. I don't know. I don't remember.
Here's what's interesting to me, though. You know, we all know what happened with you and Rick, and it becomes an FU, and we're going to sue each other. And we all know that. We've beat it up. It's in the archives, 83weeks.com. But what I never really understood was, why was this Thunder so goddamn important? It was the B show. Who gives a shit if he misses Thunder? Like, in the scheme of things, hang on.
It wasn't
I get where you're going, but I'm saying if we didn't know it was advertised, if we didn't know it was promoted, it's like, well, just do it next week. What the fuck? It doesn't matter. But if we really think, oh, well, we had teased on TV, Ric Flair's going to be making an announcement about his future, tune into Thunder, and then he's not there. And you had all these other plans with a hot young property that you were hot to trot with Goldberg. Because clearly by April, I mean, you're printing merch for the guy. You know this guy's going to be a megastar. Respectfully, you probably didn't have that fire in your belly for Lex Luger or for Arn Anderson or for Ric Flair or for Dean Malenko or even Chris Benoit. But you do for Goldberg. So I could see how it would be like, damn it.
The audience did for Goldberg. It wasn't about me. It was about what the audience wanted.
Yes. Well said. But it just feels like to me, the Eric I know would be like, he can't just do this. It just derailed the whole thing. We got all these plans. We got this merch, blah, blah, blah. I got to make an example. And at first I didn't get it, but if this is really the connective tissue, and what a headline that is, Goldberg was supposed to be a member of the Four Horsemen. Goldberg was supposed to be a horseman. If that's real, like, does that, and it may have actually worked out. I would even argue it works out better for Goldberg that it didn't happen. Because I don't know that if he was just a background figure in the Horsemen, would he have been wrestling Hulk Hogan in 3 months at the Georgia? I don't know.
Here's good point, Conrad. Here's the other thing. How much is Bill Goldberg actually going to learn by being a part of a faction unless you're not going to just learn because you're on the ring apron watching.
Yeah.
You're going to learn a little bit, but it would require so much. I mean, if there was a real mentorship going on, and maybe that was the intention, I shouldn't be so quick to dismiss that. If it was a real mentorship and an opportunity really to get Bill to the next level and slowly get him into matches that were more story driven in the body of the match, not just him going out and eating live meat, then yeah, it would have been a good idea and a good strategy. I don't know if that was really the case. Just putting him in the Four Horsemen in and of itself wasn't going to do much for Bill's growth unless there was a commitment to mentor him as well. And maybe there was. I wouldn't bet on it just because I know how things were managed back then. It's kind of there. But it's possible. Maybe the intent was there. But the idea, just from a casting point of view, the idea is a cool idea. And it would have been a better position for Bill at that point in time, as opposed to putting him in matches that he wasn't ready for. That's the worst idea. How many times have you heard me say, there's two ways of killing the character: underexpose them and overexpose them. And either one is death. And what we were doing to Bill by putting him in matches that he wasn't ready for because he'd only been in the business for 45 minutes was overexposing him. This would have prevented that to a degree.
Well, we want to prevent you guys from paying too much on your credit cards and drowning in your debt. If you haven't already, I want you to go right now to savewitheric.com. Eric can help you get your financial house in order just in time for 2025. So don't just make a New Year's resolution to save money. Make a plan, and we can help you do that. Eric's been licensed to do mortgages for years now. Go read some of our fabulous 5-star reviews at conradreviews.com. That's where you'll find nearly 1,700 5-star reviews. Our average rating there is a 4.74. That's right, 4.74 out of 5. So if you think about all the 5-star matches you've seen, our average is 4.74. And we're doing it nationwide, man. Our most recent 5-star review was just a couple of days ago from William B. in Taylor, South Carolina. We got a 5-star from Daniel Q. in Alabama, from Dustin M. in Minneapolis, Kansas. We got one from Dylan over in Pennsylvania, Jason in Tennessee, Greg in Kansas, Jacob in California. What's your story? How can we help you save some cash? Are you looking to get out of that apartment this year and get into a home of your own? Maybe you're thinking about getting that tax return money and using it towards a down payment. Did you know you can buy a house with no money down still in 2025? Yeah, there's programs out there for that. And if you're a veteran, man, you've maybe got the best and easiest loan of all. The VA home loans are just a slam dunk. And I want to mention too, if you can hear my voice and you've got credit card debt, let me just tell you, you're not alone. America's in more credit card debt than ever before. And if you're like a lot of families and you put Christmas on a credit card, Americans are usually paying off that Christmas credit card debt until like May or June of the following year. Well, you know you can do better than that. What's your interest rate on those credit cards right now? It's in the 20s, the 30s. Come on. You know you can get a better rate than that, but you can also get a greater tax deduction. You see, the interest you pay on your house is tax deductible, but the interest you pay on your credit cards, well, man, you're just pissing that away. Keep more of your own money. You work too hard for it. So if you ever find yourself where there's more month at the end of the money, savewitheric.com can help. And I know that it's become this whole dunk thing on Eric where people want to talk trash about him, but the reality is Eric paid back every nickel of his debt, and he did a lot of it thanks to understanding how to structure the debt. Eric found out the hard way. Once you owe it, it's up to you how you pay it back. Make smarter decisions with your money in 2025, and Eric can show you how to do it. Eric can show you what he did. And how's this for starters? No house payments for 2 months. That's right. You won't make a payment in February or in March. You're done until April. And come April, you're going to have a cheaper monthly payment. It's not uncommon for our listeners who have credit card debt to save $800 a month or more. Hell, I saw one last week. The guy's saving $1,700 a month. Think about that. That's like working a second full-time job or something and not having to pay taxes. What are you doing? Come on now. Keep more of your own money. Go right now. Get a cheaper monthly payment. Get rid of your credit card debt. Skip your next 2 house payments at savewitheric.com. Eric, I never know what to expect when we sit down and click record, but I love talking about the rise of Goldberg, but I think we're probably just going to cut it off right here with the whole bombshell about Goldberg could have been a horseman. we'll pick up our conversation the next time we get together and talk about Goldberg, because we've still got to talk about him winning the U.S. title, him winning the world title, and then him dropping the world title. What a crazy year 1998 is. We're just in April, and business is just about to start picking up for Mr. Goldberg, isn't it?
It does. It is indeed. And if there's enough there, happy to do another episode on Bill anytime, because it's a fascinating story. I think when we look back at, if we step back and just kind of look at all of the big moments that's happened in wrestling over the past 20 years, 25 years now, the rise and fall of Bill Goldberg, it wasn't really much of a fall. He's still out there. But the rise of Bill Goldberg in particular is fascinating. It has a lot to do with just the heightened state of interest in the industry at that time. Peak of the Monday Night Wars, WWE was growing and successful. Nitro was growing and successful. And guys like The Rock and Kurt Angle and Bill Goldberg kind of emerged out of nowhere, really. Not that they weren't anywhere. Obviously, Kurt was an Olympic gold medalist. Bill played the NFL. Rock, played football in college and pros or semi-pros. So these guys had been around. But in terms of their wrestling Q score, they came from out of nowhere and dominated the business. And so much had to do with where the state of the business is. I'd look forward to doing another part 2 version of Bill Goldberg anytime, bro.
I can't wait to talk about it either, because I do think it's something that could be studied. There's a lot of people behind the scenes in wrestling looking for what's the next big thing. And a lot of people reach for, is there a free agent that we could go grab and bring them over? And then we get all of their brand equity and all of their fan base comes. And now we just create something that everybody wants to see. And that's worked before. Certainly it worked with Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, but there is another way to do it. I mean, this is a guy who's fresh out of wrestling school, and he's going to become one of the biggest stars in the world, but he's not having a banger match. He's not having 5-star matches on cagematch.net. Like, he's a character. He's Mike Tyson. It's short bursts. It's about storytelling. It's about something we can believe in.
Character development.
Yes. It's just a fascinating study in how to generate revenue and accentuate the positives, hide the negatives. And what's the story you're trying to sell? Mike Tyson was a big draw in boxing, and Goldberg's going to be quite a big draw here in WCW. Don't forget to join us this Saturday night. Saturday night's main event is back. It's going to be live on NBC. It's going to be live on Peacock, and Eric and I are going to be live on YouTube right after, totally free, and you don't want to miss it. The only way to make sure you don't miss it and you get to interact and ask Eric questions live. You'll be there. He'll be there. Hit him with whatever you want. We'll make it happen. It's 83weeks.com. Go hit the subscribe button. Turn on your notifications bell. And Eric, I hope you and the fam have a great time traveling down to Tampa. I can't believe that North Florida is getting snow right now. And I can't believe that Top Guy Rumble is next week. This is going to be a lot of fun, Eric.
I can't wait. Mrs. B is going to be there with me. She's a bigger hit at these things than I am, but that always makes it fun for me. We're looking forward to seeing you and Megan and the new lake house and hanging out for a few days and hanging out with all of our family from Ad Free Shows. It's going to be a blast.
It is going to be a blast. Can't wait. And we'll see you guys this Saturday night live at 83weeks.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad Free Shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today, and hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.